Larry Johnson, I'm not going to call him a veteran again. He's a spring chicken. Larry Johnson knows everything about the intelligence world, about the military, about the military-industrial complex. He's the founder of the influential Berg Associates, and he joins us now. Larry, wonderful to see you again. I must say, you always look
Brother
like
George.
you're just off the beach in Hawaii, but I know that that's just deep cover. You're the sort of man who likes to leave people guessing where you are. I have the rare and great opportunity to question you about some really very important things, but the first one of them has to be the apparent imminence of a war in Venezuela. The noble, honorable judge, our mutual friend, Andrew Napolitano, just said that the exfiltration of Machado today makes war, sadly, more rather than less likely. It would be illegal. It would be madness. But being illegal and being mad are characteristic of Donald Trump these days. Is he going to do it?
I hope not. And I think he's going to be compelled to only try to use air power, which it's going to kill some Venezuelans, but it's not going to break Maduro. George, I've seen this pattern before. When I was at the CIA back in 1987, and I left there in the fall of '89. I was there for the invasion of Panama, and my branch, the Central America branch, on the Directorate of Analysis, the analyst, a woman named Alicia, she was directly involved in working with the Directorate of Operations, and they were planning a series of for more than a year. They did a number of provocations trying to provoke Manuel Noriega into using military force or doing something in which we could then justify ourselves invading Panama, which we ultimately did. So the same pattern is being repeated here off the coast of Venezuela, with the important difference that with respect to Panama, we already had the U.S. military present in Panama. U.S. Southern Command, aka Southcom, was based at Quarry Heights, just outside Panama City in Panama. And we also had a military presence up in Colón. We don't have that in Venezuela. And the problem or the challenge that Venezuela poses, it's 3 times the size of Vietnam. And George, I'm sure as you recall, during the war in Vietnam, at the height of deployment of U.S. forces in April of 1969, the United States had 543,000 soldiers in Vietnam. And how did that work out? We lost. With more than 500,000 soldiers, we were unable to defeat the South Vietnamese. Well, put ourselves now in Venezuela, 3 times the size of Vietnam, and with jungle, higher mountains than what are in Vietnam, much more difficult terrain, borders with Guyana, Brazil, and Colombia, which are, again, anything and anybody could get through there. So this would be an uncontrollable, if the United States is dumb enough to put troops on the ground, I think there'll be more body bags coming out of Venezuela than came out of Iraq and Afghanistan combined. It could be that deadly for us. If they drop bombs on Maduro, I think Trump will do that. I don't think Maduro is going to leave. And just as we did with the Houthis in the Red Sea, we'll declare victory and go home.
Well, let's look at the big picture, as I know you have been doing, Larry, and I fixed on every word that you wrote today. The big enchilada, the National Security Survey, which seems to sketch the foreign policy orientation and next steps in the United States. I personally saw 1 or 2 good things in that, if he really intends to implement that, which is, of course, an open question. But for the viewers who haven't read your piece today, kindly summarize your take on the new NSS
The biggest change is the United States is telling Europe we're going to separate. We're going to start seeing other people. It's like the end of a long-term romantic relationship's come to an end. United States is basically announcing it's going to divorce itself from Europe. Now, that's on paper. Will they actually do it? We'll see. Because I've seen, I had friends who announced they were getting a divorce, and then they stayed married for 2 more years. So that could be that situation. What's interesting is Ukraine gets very short shrift in this, and the basic message is Ukraine is now your problem. Europe, good luck. We'll help you. If you want any weapons, we're happy to sell it to you. The bellicose threats that previously were directed at Russia and China in the Joe Biden national security strategy that was published in January of 2023, and then the Donald Trump first version that was published back in, I think, December of 2017. Trump now, in this latest version, has moved away from those bellicose, threatening words. Again, it's one thing to write it down in a book. It's another thing to say, what is the actual government policy going to be? And as I'm watching different articles get published, particularly one that appeared in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, detailing how Operation Spiderweb, this elaborate thing that started in December of 23 and was executed on June 1st of 2025, drone attacks on strategic bomber bases inside Russia, excuse me. Well, that information came from the CIA. This wasn't a simple matter of some intrepid reporter going, gee, I'm a little bored today. What am I going to write about? Oh, I know. No. The CIA, I believe, is actively working right now to undermine Donald Trump's effort to disengage from Ukraine, because the CIA is so heavily invested in Ukraine, along with the U.S., now called U.S. Department of War, that I think they're going to try to sabotage any moves that Trump makes to try to extricate himself. And that's why I say the document is one thing, but it's not a game plan for how they're going to play the game. It provides some reference points.
Of course, I accept that, but it is a good plan if implemented, and that's a step forward at least. But you touch on something there, Larry, that is quite hard to understand. I was talking with the judge earlier about Barack Obama's repeated visits to 10 Downing Street and what those secret, because we're never told what these meetings were about. There seems to be a revolt openly against Donald Trump's foreign policy by the CIA and other agencies on the ground, by retired presidents like Barack Obama. Trump never seemed, for a guy that was going to lock them up, he hasn't locked anybody up.
Yeah. Well, and he also selects the wrong people. Remember, he's the one that chose John Bolton as his national security advisor, Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, Gina Haspel, who was absolutely up to her eyeballs working with MI6 in the lead up to the 2016 election to subvert Donald Trump. He names her as the director of CIA. So, Trump's his own worst enemy with respect to some of this. But I think we did get some signals this week that the worm is starting to turn against Ukraine and that Trump is serious about distancing himself. The first was when in Doha at I'm not sure what the particular conference was, but Donald Trump Jr. showed up and, boy, lit into Zelensky like a chainsaw going through a bamboo forest. Then Donald Trump came out and said, hey, yeah, it's time for elections. Up to this point, we've been willing to go along with the nonsense that, you can't hold elections in wartime. Even though Franklin Delano Roosevelt did it, Winston Churchill did it, Abraham Lincoln did it. And so, that's just a red herring. So the fact that you've got movement on that front and that then certain equipment is not going forward, the Department of War is withholding it. However, the U.S. Congress, which is bought and paid for by the Ukrainians, I am now reliably informed that there are 29 members of the House of Representatives and the Senate who have received multiple millions of dollars apiece. And that money is intended to, buy support. I guarantee you that when this whole investigation is done, you're going to find people like Kaya Kallas, Ruta, and von der Leyen have been also getting money. I guarantee it.
Well, I'm certainly not going to contradict it. They're not here to defend themselves, of course, but they're welcome to call in if they'd like to rebut that. But Larry, the turning on Zelensky is now so widespread that things that you and I have been saying to each other and to others over the last 4 years are now routinely said by our biggest critics, the people who called us names and made allegations about us and about our sincerity. They are now saying, the Spectator, on the language issue this day, that calling out, denouncing the Ukrainian ban on the Russian language, spoken by its own people, including by Zelensky. The Economist, the Financial Times, even the New York Times at the weekend. It's now open season on Zelensky. How long can he last?
Yeah, I think the end game started when the initial leak about $100 million, fraud that had occurred within Zelensky's government, and Umarov, had to resign. The actual number, and I know that the U.S. Department of War, through its Inspector General, is looking into $48 billion. That's billion with a B as in boy, not million, that have been diverted through banks in the Baltics, primarily Estonia, and those money then has been moved on into the accounts of politicians and others that using a variety of banks in the Caribbean and the typical offshore money laundering centers. So when that leak took place, that told me, okay, the avalanche is starting, because they could have come out with a lot more. But they're painting. The narrative is now shifting, at least from the Trump standpoint. They're going to paint Zelensky as corrupt, and once you can show that he's corrupt, then it allows the United States to say, well, hey, the guy's corrupt, and he's cracking down on the language of Russian speakers, and he's persecuting the Christian church, the canonical church of Orthodoxy in the Ukraine. And so all of this is setting the stage that they're going to replace him. Now, I'm not schooled in the law in Ukraine, but I'm not sure that General Zaluzhny, now ambassador to the UK, can simply waltz in and be named president. That's one of the demands that Russia has, is that there has to be a legitimately elected and empowered leader of Ukraine for them to negotiate with. Without that, there will be no agreement and no possibility of a deal.
But does that imply a cessation of hostilities whilst that happens? Because that's one of the things that Zelensky is now. It's his last card. Okay, then, I'm a dictator. I'm prepared to hold elections. I could do it in 30 to 90 days, but the EU and the US will have to guarantee a ceasefire and our security so that we can hold these elections. Are we not actually past that point, Larry?
Oh, absolutely, George. That ship has sailed. The Russians are not going to accept anything less than the recognition by the international community, the de jure, not de facto, the de jure recognition that Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk are now permanently part of the Russian Federation. Russia's not going to stop in place and allow Ukraine to retain part of Zaporizhia or Kherson. Not happening. So that's the deal that's on the table right now is accept the fact that that territory is ours, have new elections in Ukraine, get NATO out of Ukraine, withdraw all NATO presence, period, gone, and then we'll talk about how to have a ceasefire. Until that happens, Russia is going to continue advancing as it is right now very rapidly in Dnipropetrovsk. Dnipropetrovsk, for the listeners who aren't familiar with the geography, it's north of Zaporizhia and to the west of Donetsk. And it bumps up against the Dnieper River. Russia is likely to capture that and take full control of Dnipropetrovsk, I think, by the end of February. The similar fates await Kharkiv, which is north of Luhansk, and Sumy, which is to the west of Kharkiv. And then we go down to Nikolaev, which is south of Kherson, towards Odessa, and the taking of Odessa. I don't think Russia's going to stop this and end its military operations until they're fully in control of Odessa, Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, and Sumy. Because they've offered the deal to Ukraine in the West. Ukraine and Europe refuse to take the deal. Russia says, okay, they're going to press forward with the offensive, and there's not a thing that Ukraine or Europe can do to stop it.
What an extraordinary turn of events. You and I have, I think, been vindicated in the stance that we've taken on this conflict throughout. Maybe the last throw was in Downing Street yesterday. I must say the three Musketeers, Merz, Macron, and Starmer, and Zelensky, they looked particularly glum. Their body language was four men that have been crushed. Do you think there's anything left up the sleeve of the Europeans to wreck this?
Well, let me give you an example or what shows a sign of extreme desperation. The total population of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany combined is 220 million, roughly. The total ground forces, if you could put all the armies together of the UK, France, and Germany, come to a little less than 500,000. They are these three mental midgets, and this is no insult to midgets, but these Lilliputians that pretend to be leaders. Their suggestion is that Ukraine, which now has a total population of 19 million, 1/11, 1/12 of what those three have, they want that Ukraine to have 800,000 troops.
Yeah, no,
which is 300,000 more than they've cobbled together. I mean, what sort of planet are these people living on? And it'd be one thing if they were sitting there on warehouses filled with artillery shells and modern tanks and armored personnel carriers and artillery barrels and drones, but they're not. It'd be one thing if their economies were chugging along and turning out 3-4% growth per year. They're not. And that their debt to GDP ratio was a healthy 20% like it is in Russia. Nope, just the opposite. England's above 100%, France is 116%, and Germany just this week passed a law that allows them to do deficit spending. Because in the past that was, I think the German term is verboten.
Well, there's a lot that used to be verboten that is now de rigueur, to mix my languages. Now, I suppose their last hope, Larry, is to steal Russia's money. Although some people we know, Martyanov, for example, he believes they've already stolen Russia's money, and that all of this kerfuffle about permission to do so is moot because they've already stolen it. Russia, if that happens, it not only deals a death blow to these places for sovereign wealth funds of anybody for the future, forever, but it will be retaliated to, won't it? The Russians will seize comparable assets of the complying countries in their world.
Yeah, this is reminiscent. I don't know if you ever saw or familiar with the movie called Dumb and Dumber. It featured a comedian, Jim Carrey, and Jeff Daniels. And they played two individuals who were not what you'd call the brightest light bulbs in the tanning bed. And at one scene in the past, they were carrying this suitcase supposedly filled with millions of dollars. And when they delivered it, the guy opens it up and it's filled with all IOUs. Okay, that's the Europeans right now with the Russian money. Okay, they've got this suitcase filled with IOUs. The problem is Euroclear, this clearinghouse system that was set up, I believe, in like 1968, 69. It was designed that banks and brokerages, they could put their money there, confident that it wasn't going to be stolen and that it would be held, and then transactions were sent where needed as demand came up. Well, the Belgians right now are the biggest stumbling block to the European desire to steal money, even if they've already stolen it, because given a treaty that they have with Russia, Russia will be able to go to a mediator and secure a judgment that will allow Russia then to begin seizing assets. And I've heard one estimate that there's up to $1 trillion of European assets still in Russia. But the Russians are very legalistic, unlike the West. They make an agreement, by God, they hold it. They don't say, how can we cheat them and steal it? So they're not going to act preemptively. But if France, Germany, and the UK manage to bully their way through or go through with this, they are going to actually pay a real economic price, not just metaphorical, but it will be financial.